Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Pwnverse22. Today, we are redefining security intelligence, or at least trying to find a middle ground for defining this concept. My name is Mayan Stegmann. I will be your captain for today. Just kidding. But yeah, I am a security analyst and researcher from South Africa. I have a fond interest in cyber warfare and intelligence studies. I've done some research before on cyber warfare, and you can actually find that research you can find it on my social media platforms, as well as the Global Cybersecurity Observatory and the Security Magazine. And speaking of social media, feel free to go and look for me on the internet, find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and feel free to reach out. I'm easygoing, I don't always bite, and I'm generally pretty welcoming and pretty friendly. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me on social media after this. I'd like to hear your feedback, and I'd like to meet new people and have some nice conversations. But without further ado, let's get straight into it, and let's start by defining intelligence. Now, you've probably heard of the term before, and you probably have a rough idea for what intelligence is. If you think about intelligence, you either think about how smart people are, or the level of intellect that someone has, or you think of it more in a more espionage sense. You think of it as the typical James Bond or that espionage context. So in the military, if you ask the military folks, they will say that it is the act of gathering information on enemy activity. It is the ability to understand your adversary, understanding their activity, how they operate, and being able to use that information to predict and anticipate future activity or processes, procedures, techniques, etc. Then, if you ask a psychologist, they would say that it is the individual's ability to learn or understand or to deal with new or trying situations. So I guess we can kind of, break it down into defining it as the act of understanding. So now that begs the question, what is security intelligence? And as you see, I've kind of abbreviated it to SecINT, and I'm still deciding whether I should coin that term or not. I might. So when I say security intelligence, I'm not necessarily referring to cyber threat intelligence, at least not entirely. Threat intelligence is a pillar of security intelligence, but it's not it completely. The problem with a concept like this is that, as with the definition of intelligence, there's no universal definition for security intelligence. But for the purpose of this talk, I'll be focusing on it as a methodology used to provide holistic insight into the area of operation within the cyberspace through the collection and analysis of information regarding risk exposure, attack surface, operational security, and threat landscape, in turn enhancing decision making and security operations, and also as security intelligence being an effort to remove intelligence silos within business and adopt a more meshed approach. Now, throughout the course of this presentation, I will be breaking it down and explaining it in a bit more detail, but that's the gist of it for now. So now, let's address the elephant in the room. Security intelligence compared to threat intelligence. What is it? Because at the moment it sounds a lot like threat intelligence, right? So, threat intelligence, as defined by the US National Institute of Standards and Technologies, Computer Security Resource Center, or NIST CSRC for short, they define it as threat information that has been aggregated, transformed, analyzed, interpreted, or enriched to provide the necessary context for the decision-making process. Now, I get you. It still kind of sounds like, we're talking about the same thing here. However, where CTI, or cyber threat intelligence, is the collection and analysis of threat information, specifically threat information, security intelligence, or SecINT, takes a step back, and it takes a bit more of a holistic approach to information analysis, and it looks at all facets of the organization's risk exposure within the cyber landscape. So I've put together like a little diagram to explain it a bit more in depth and technical. So here, as you can see at the top and at the bottom, we have threat intelligence and security operations. Those are what I call the foundational pillars of security intelligence. And then in the middle, these little blue rectangles, boxes, they are what I call the critical pillars of security intelligence. And as you can see, the arrows kind of point the flow of operations, processes, whatever you feel like calling it. So naturally, your threat intelligence will feed into each one of these blue pillars, and the same goes for your security operations. Your threat intelligence is a vital part of security operations. And then everything in the middle, your asset management, attack surface management, vulnerability management, and risk management, all work hand in hand and also feed into your security operations. So let's break it down even further, and let's look at the foundational pillars first. So we have our threat intelligence, firstly. Now, your threat intelligence obviously highlights your threat landscape, and it enriches and empowers your security operations. Speaking of, your security operations are it's your foundation of your organization's cybersecurity program. It's your day-to-day operations and your day-to-day efforts to defend your organization in the cyber landscape. That said, it doesn't have to be a large facility with big screens and dashboards like that typical Hollywood SOC. A lot of your security operations can be automated these days, even though it might cost you a pretty penny. It is possible to automate a lot of the security operations functions. And like I say, your security operations are the day-to-day tactics, techniques, and procedures used to maintain your cyber defenses. You see what I did there? Alright, so jumping into the critical pillars. First off, we have asset management, which I've kind of bundled together with attack surface management. And these two are basically your understanding of your assets and where they might be exposed to the internet, be that intentionally or unintentionally. And then we got vulnerability management, which also ties into your asset and attack surface management. But I mean, as I've mentioned before, these pillars, principles, whatever you feel like calling them, they can operate individually, but they operate the most optimally when they are meshed together and when they work in harmony. So your vulnerability management is understanding which of those assets are then vulnerable to attack. And I mean, we all understand vulnerability management, but it extends further than just your software inventory. Your human layer should also be considered when taking into account your vulnerabilities, because if we look at social engineering and phishing attacks, attackers exploit us humans and our foundational good nature for malicious activity. So therefore, security awareness and promoting a security first culture is critical to protect both the employee and organization. And then we have risk management. We all love risk management, but risk management is kind of a very vague and broad umbrella term for a lot of different things. So within risk management, now I'm talking about specifically digital risk management, we have our cybersecurity risk. Your cybersecurity risk is what most of us understand risk to be in a digital sense, and that's basically just your assets being vulnerable, that vulnerability being exploited by a threat, and that equaling your risk. So it's all of those aspects, the sum of all of those aspects. Then we have our third party risk, and that is basically, understanding to what extent your third party service providers, suppliers, vendors, etc. are putting your organization at risk in a cyber sense. We have our operational risk and brand protection. And your brand protection, I mean, I'll get into it in a bit more detail later, but it's basically, understanding how your brand is being exploited in the public, be that on the internet, what have you. So then, I mean, we can kind of define risk as understanding the likelihood and impact of a data breach or leak, security incident, disastrous event, or cyber attack, and work out then the impact that it will have on financial performance, operation, or reputation. Moving on, there are two types of security intelligence. Now, if you look at threat intelligence, there are four types of cyber threat intelligence, and that is your operational threat intelligence, tactical, technical, and strategic intelligence. Now, as you'll see, I've taken two out of those, that being your strategic and operational security intelligence. It's very similar, but also different, but much like with any intelligence, it all stems from the same thing, so there are similarities across the board. So now your operational security intelligence, it's often referred to as technical security intelligence or technical threat intelligence, and it is essentially your day-to-day understanding of ongoing cyber attacks, threat actors, campaigns, events, etc. Then we have our strategic security intelligence. Now that's more of a broad overview of an organization's entire threat landscape. It's a high level understanding of risk exposure and attack surface, and it's usually analyzed and interpreted by humans because machines are not yet capable of producing these insights. You never know what can happen tomorrow or the day after that, but as of now, machines aren't capable of collecting and analyzing and producing such insights and intelligence yet. And there's generally a business value to strategic security intelligence. It's very business oriented, and it's most useful for high level decision making by your executives, the board of directors. So, to put it in context, your operational security intelligence, that is your stuff like your threat intelligence and your vulnerability intelligence that is being collected by your security operations team, and it is to be used on a day-to-day basis. It's something that's either, the intelligence is produced daily or weekly, whereas with strategic SecINT, it's more of a longer term thing. So, an operational security intelligence report would be produced daily, whereas a strategic security intelligence report would be produced either weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly. The strategic side of things gives it a bit more of a broader overview rather than an in-depth technical day-to-day overview. So then, jumping into the benefits of adopting a security intelligence strategy. Naturally, an intelligence-driven security strategy can only benefit you, and it can enhance threat prevention, risk management, and brand protection. Like I've said before, the pillars or principles can stand alone, or they can work in harmony to reduce your overall organizational risk exposure. And then, of course, it improves compliance with industry standards and regulations such as ISO 27001, PCI, SOC 2, etc. It's adopting an intelligence-driven security strategy can improve your compliance posture with these different standards and regulations and just overall security program. Now let's talk about the silos that come with security intelligence. And you've probably heard it before, but information security in general is pretty siloed. And what is meant by that is that there's not a lot of collaboration and cooperation between the different elements of your security program. It's very dispersed. So, like I've said, traditional security intelligence is siloed. Your security operations, for instance, won't necessarily be collaborating and cooperating with your fraud prevention element unless, in the event of a security incident or a data breach, what have you, then they might work together, kind of brainstorm a bit, bump heads, put ideas together. But after that, before that, they're doing their own thing. So therefore a meshed approach is needed to break the silos and achieve those holistic insights. Now, I'm not saying that the different elements should be working in the same Slack group or the same office space or the same room, whatever, but they should be in communication with each other, and the different elements should collaborate and cooperate with each other to produce these insights and be able to look at the organization holistically. So then, how do we do that? How do we apply security intelligence within our organization? Now, that requires a synergy between various different things, and those being security operations, your threat detection and response capabilities, vulnerability intelligence, so your vulnerability management, asset management, and attack surface management. Those are all, they need to be able to work together. Your threat intelligence, naturally, but that usually ties into your security operations. Third-party risk intelligence, we spoke about that. We've seen countless times that data breaches and compromises happen not necessarily directly because of the organization, but because of third-party risk, suppliers, vendors, service providers getting breached, and that then flowing downstream to the organization. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but we've seen it have some quite devastating effects and quite a big reach. Yeah, we've seen international catastrophes per se. Then geopolitical intelligence. You might be thinking it's a bit of a weird one. Why is that there? Isn't that usually reserved for the larger organizations or your law enforcement or military? But you'd be surprised. I mean, if you look at conflicts, now I don't want to get too political, but if you look at what's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment, there have been quite a few organizations that have fallen victim to cyber attack purely based on affiliation. They weren't directly involved with any conflict, but they, their home base is based in a country that is in conflict with another country. Therefore, they are affiliated with that country. Or, the list goes on, but it is very important to understand what's going on around you in a geopolitical space and in the physical realm, much more than just the cyberspace. Then we have brand intelligence. Now, I've touched on this previously, but brand intelligence, basically understanding how your brand is being used and abused in the public, and also how your brand is being perceived by the public. If you are, if your brand, if your organization's name is being used in cyber attacks, in phishing attacks, in social engineering, that's not good. We've seen it countless times with business email compromise and email spoofing. It is generally not good if your brand is being abused and exploited for malicious gain. Then we have security leadership. Now, security leadership is critical across the board. I'm not necessarily talking about your CISOs. I'm not necessarily talking about your directors. I'm talking about right through the cycle. It is important to have security leadership from the entry level up to the executive level. And it is also important to prioritize that security leadership. And not necessarily just in the event that, everything hits the fan. It is important to constantly prioritize the security leadership, because without leadership, a security program is stuck in the mud. A security program needs effective and adequate leaders to be able to drive forward. And generally, you only see the security leadership spring into action, or rather not spring into action, but get the necessary attention when there is the need for that. Be that when there's a cyber attack or a security incident, what have you. But it is important to that the security element of your business always gets the necessary attention. Now, I mean, it goes without saying that us security folk, we always get the short end of the stick, because security is not necessarily a value adding business element. It can be, but it's not always the case, unless you are an MSSP or something like that. The security element of the business is not always adding value. It's not making sales, nothing like that. But the security element of the business is saving money. They are preventing money from being stolen. They're preventing financial damage, reputational damage, operational damage, etc. So that's why it is important to have adequate security leadership, so that there's more value to be added, and they understand where the value needs to be added and how it needs to be added. Then, moving on swiftly, we have the security intelligence cycle, and this is the last thing I'm going to touch on before we end off. So now the security intelligence cycle is, you've probably seen before, the intelligence cycle, the cyber threat intelligence cycle. It's very much the same, just different concept. So we have 5 steps that you kind of need to use to be able to make the most out of your security intelligence and properly employ it. We have aggregation. Being able to consolidate all sources of intelligence into one location, be that through a single pane of glass dashboard or a platform that you have set up. There are various open source and commercial platforms available. So, make use of them. Aggregate your data and information into a single location. Then we have contextualization. Information and data without context is essentially useless. Context provides a better understanding of the threat or risk and what it means to the business, what it means in numbers, and contextualization is important for everyone to understand the information and data. Then we have prioritization. Ooh, that was a bit of a tongue twister. Prioritization is necessary to ensure the relevant intelligence is getting the necessary attention based on parameters set by the organization. So you need to prioritize your intelligence after you've contextualized it, to understand which areas need to be focused on first. Then we have utilization. You know, if you don't spring into action and use the intelligence that you've gathered and analyzed, then, you know, it kind of leaves it, it renders it useless. So you need to automatically apply curated intelligence to your environment. And after that, you need to learn and adapt from that. You need to continuously assess your environment to maintain updated and enriched security intelligence. So, to explain it a bit more, you start by aggregating your data and information. You aggregate that into your platform, whatever platform you have. After that, you start analyzing it. You contextualize it. You start putting meaning to that information, that intelligence. Then you start deciding which needs to be acted on first and how it will be acted on. Then you start utilizing that. You act upon your intelligence that you've gathered and analyzed. And after that, you look back and you learn and adapt your operations accordingly. And the cycle continues. You know, it's a continuous effort. It's a daily, continuous motion. So, why is security intelligence important? We've spoken about how to implement it, the benefits of it, but let's end off with why it's important. And I mean, the main reason is obvious. You know, security threats, threat actors, hacking groups, cyber criminals, they are becoming increasingly sophisticated. And they are using these highly sophisticated next generation techniques, tactics, and procedures to compromise organizations. So, you know, with that said, if they are using next gen tactics, techniques, and procedures, then surely organizations should utilize next gen threat detection and response and prevention capabilities. So, you know, gone are the days that a simple firewall and antivirus are your primary lines of defense. You know, it's a lot more than that. Our organizations are you know, cover a lot wider area now, and it's not necessarily everything on premises. We have systems in the cloud. Our infrastructure is very dispersed, and for that we need to understand holistically what is going on and how the threats are, well, threatening our organization. So, you know, we kind of have to stay up to date and stay current in this threat landscape. Because if we fall behind, the threats aren't going to wait. They are continuously evolving. And the shocking part of it is that they don't even need sophistication to wreak havoc. We've seen, you know, very unsophisticated, faceless hoodies in their mom's basement hackers that have caused a lot of damage, financial damage and reputational damage and disruption in operations. So in order to be able to defend against these threats, you know, be they of any caliber, we need to have an intelligence-driven security strategy and program, because without it we'll fall behind. And that's the gist of it. And that brings us to the end of that. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And a special thank you to Joaquin Iglesias, CEO and founder of InfoSec United, and the man behind all of this. Thanks, dude, for putting together such an amazing conference. And yeah, hopefully next time we can do this in person. But if you didn't know, Joaquin has also put together a little capture the flag CTF in partnership with Hackrocks. So do feel free to go check that out if that is your vibe. And yeah, like I say, I'd love to hear your feedback. So feel free to reach out to me on social media. Yeah, I'm generally very social and very welcoming. So yeah, but I really love to hear your feedback, what you thought of this, whether you thought it was absolute rubbish or whether you actually found some insights in it. So do feel free to reach out to me. And then, yeah, until next time, thank you and good night.